For almost 100 years, we thought we knew the story. It was clean, logical, comfortable. Around 13,000 years ago, during the last ice age, sea levels dropped. A massive stretch of land rose between Siberia and Alaska. The Bering Land Bridge. Hunters followed mammoths. They crossed. Ice melted. They moved south. Civilization began. Simple. Then, in 1929, near Clovis, New Mexico, workers uncovered stone spear points buried beside mammoth bones. The tools were elegant, fluted, precise, over 13,000 years old. Archaeologists gave them a name, the Clovis culture, and for decades, that was it. Clovis first. Textbooks printed it. Museums displayed it. Professors defended it. America was the last continent humans reached. One migration, one people, one beginning. It felt complete, but history has a habit of breaking open when you look closer. Because far to the south, in Chile, something was waiting. At a place called Monte Verde, archaeologists uncovered evidence of human life dating back 14,500 years. Older than Clovis, not by a little, by centuries. And in the Yukon, signs of hunting over 15,000 years old. In Oregon, human footprints preserved in ancient mud, more than 14,000 years old. These people weren't supposed to be there. According to the old model, the ice-free corridor between the massive Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets didn't even open until later. So how did they get there? You can feel the tension building at this point, because once a single date falls apart, the entire timeline starts to shake. The Clovis first theory wasn't just slightly wrong, it might have been fundamentally incomplete. And that's when something even more powerful entered the investigation. Not shovels, not spear points, DNA. When DNA entered the picture in the 2000s and 2010s, everything changed. Archaeology can tell you what people left behind. DNA tells you who they were. Scientists began extracting genetic material from ancient bones buried for over 12,000 years. It wasn't easy. Most samples were degraded, contaminated, nearly useless, but technology caught up. At a site in Montana known as Anzac, researchers sequenced the genome of a child buried around 12,600 years ago. In Alaska, at Upward Sun River, they studied remains dating to about 11,500 years ago. What they found was shocking. These children were directly related to modern Native American populations, but their ancestry didn't begin in the Americas. It traced back to Siberia, and not just to recent Siberian hunters, but to a much older population known as the ancient North Eurasians, who lived near Lake Baikal around 24,000 years ago. This was during the height of the Ice Age. These people weren't just wandering hunters. They survived one of the harshest climates Earth had ever seen. And at some point, their descendants mixed with East Asian populations. That mixture, that specific genetic blend, became the foundation of the first Americans. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The genetic split between Native American ancestors and their Asian relatives didn't happen 13,000 years ago. It happened much earlier. Around 23,000 years ago, populations became isolated in a region known as Beringia, the vast landmass that connected Siberia and Alaska. For thousands of years, they may have lived there, trapped between massive ice sheets to the east and harsh climates to the west, not moving, not spreading, just surviving. Geneticists call this the Beringian standstill, a population paused in time. Then, sometime after 16,000 years ago, something shifted. The ice sheets began to retreat, but the inland corridor between the glaciers was still blocked. So how did they move south? They didn't walk through the ice, they went around it, along the Pacific coastline. In 2023, major studies published in Nature and Cell revealed deeper genetic connections to coastal populations from northern China and the Russian Far East, dating back around 26,000 years. These weren't just inland mammoth hunters, they were coastal foragers, people who knew how to live by the sea. And if you understand that, the migration route suddenly makes sense. Instead of marching through frozen wastelands, early Americans likely traveled by boat, hugging the coastline, moving slowly south over generations, fishing, harvesting shellfish, stopping on islands, settling, moving again. This wasn't a single heroic expedition. It was a long, patient unfolding, wave after wave, and each wave left its fingerprint in the DNA. By the time we see evidence in Chile at 14,500 years, those coastal migrants had already traveled thousands of miles, which means the journey began much earlier than anyone imagined. Clovis wasn't the beginning, it was just one branch of a much older tree. And just when scientists thought the puzzle was coming together, the DNA revealed something even stranger, a genetic echo that shouldn't have been there at all. When researchers began comparing ancient American genomes to populations around the world, they noticed something unexpected. Fragments, tiny genetic signatures that didn't belong to modern humans alone. Early Americans carried traces of Denisovans, an archaic human species that lived in Asia more than 40,000 years ago. The same Denisovan DNA appears today in populations in Tibet and parts of Melanesia. That means the ancestors of Native Americans weren't just mixing with different modern human groups. Their story reaches back to encounters that happened tens of thousands of years before anyone crossed into the Americas, before Beringia.
Before the Ice Age migrations, the first Americans already carried echoes of ancient Eurasia inside their cells. But that wasn't the strangest discovery. In parts of the Amazon, certain indigenous groups showed a genetic signal linking them, faintly but undeniably, to Aboriginal Australians and people from Papua New Guinea. This connection has been described as a ghost lineage because it doesn't fit neatly into the main migration model. There is no clear, continuous population trail connecting Australia to South America, and yet the shared DNA exists. The signal is small, but it's real, which suggests that sometime deep in the late Pleistocene, there may have been an additional migration wave along the Pacific Rim, possibly earlier than the main founding population, possibly smaller, possibly absorbed into later groups. Some of those lineages disappeared, others survived in fragments. Genetics doesn't give us the full story, but it gives us the fingerprints. And the fingerprints say this: the Americas were not settled by one group, not by one journey, not by one moment in time. Instead, layered migrations unfolded over thousands of years. Populations split, mixed, isolated, expanded. The genetic map of the Americas today looks like a mosaic, a pattern built from ancient North Eurasian ancestry, East Asian coastal heritage, Denisovan traces, and rare signals that hint at even deeper movements across Asia. This complexity helps explain something else scientists had long observed but couldn't fully explain: the wide biological diversity among indigenous American populations, differences in physical traits, differences in adaptation, differences in genetic markers tied to climate, altitude, and diet. By the 12th millennium BCE, distinct cultural regions already existed, not fragments of a single spreading tribe, not temporary camps of wandering migrants, but rooted societies, independent development, different tool traditions, different diets, different genetic patterns shaped by local environments. And the deeper scientists look, the clearer one truth becomes. The first Americans were not a single people crossing a bridge. They were the result of layered migrations stretching back to 24,000 years ago, with ancestral threads reaching to populations living around 26,000 years ago, and even genetic echoes from encounters over 40,000 years ago. A long formation, a slow unfolding, a web, not a line. The Clovis culture, discovered in 1929, still matters. Those fluted spear points remain extraordinary, but they are no longer the beginning. They are one chapter in a much older book, and that changes the emotional weight of the story, because it reminds us that human history is not neat, it's not clean, it's not built from single heroic migrations. It's built from generations of uncertainty, families moving into unknown landscapes, children growing up in climates their ancestors had never seen, communities forming identities far from the lands their DNA still remembered. When we look at the genetic mosaic of indigenous peoples across North and South America today, we are looking at the living result of those ancient decisions, those risks, those journeys. The Americas were not simply colonized once, they were shaped over thousands of years by people who carried within them the memory of Eurasia, the resilience of Beringia, and the innovation of coastal survival. And perhaps the most powerful realization is this: we are still discovering the story. Each new genome sequenced, each new site uncovered, each new study published, like those in 2023 that reshaped the migration model yet again, reminds us that history is not fixed. It evolves, just like we did. The first Americans were not who we thought they were. They were more complex, more ancient, more interconnected, and their story stretches far deeper into the human past than we ever imagined. And somewhere, buried beneath ice, sand, or forest floor, there may be evidence that pushes the timeline back even further. Because if the last century has taught us anything, it's that the story is never as simple as we think, and that's what makes it powerful.